just keep talking.
There we go.
Reverend Keith Norton is my mentor, and he is the president of the church. And he's a friend and a very good person, and I'm going to read his bio now. For as long as he can remember, he has had a connection to the spirit world. Some of his earliest memories of being a child include seeing and hearing people from beyond. Some people call them ghosts or spirits, but to him, it was a normal part of life. It was these experiences that made him want to learn more about this unseen world. As a young child, he used to spend hours reading every book he could find on the spirit world, and the more he read, the more fascinated he became in learning about the spirit world, including mediumship and spiritualism. For many years, he was in search of a church that felt right. And once he entered the sanctuary here at Center of Enlightenment in 2006, he knew this was the place for him. Over the years, he has served on the board of directors in many roles, serving as trustee, vice president, and president. The Center of Enlightenment is and always has been a special place to his family, as him and beautiful wife Fiona were married in this very church on October 3rd, 2009. In February of 2016, he was ordained as minister at the Church of Enlightenment. In February of 2020, he was appointed as the senior minister by Reverend Ken Nowaczewski. In March of 2020, he attained his master teacher degree in Usui Holy Fire Reiki, the third three systems of natural healing. So welcome, Reverend Keith.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
Good morning.
Excited to share my story with you. The sermon is kind of a little bit different. Normally, I have a whole sermon, but this one kind of ad-libbing. And it's my story as a medium. So back in '87, I was a medium. Then I got larger, and now I'm a 2X. No, I'm just kidding. That's my. But seriously, so for many years, I've been working with my mediumship, and I realized that some people know my story, some people don't, but I wanted to share my story as a collective whole to demonstrate and share with others what spiritualism really can be about and how we can use spiritualism as a gift on many different fronts. So when I was about 5 or 6, I remember my brother and I shared a room in our house, and I remember waking up and hearing like what sounded like a party going on in the corner of the room. I could hear laughter, I could hear people talking, I could hear like the whole conversation. I don't recall the conversation because I was so little at the time, but I woke my brother up. I'm like, how can you sleep through this? It's like just constant chatter, constant like party going on, you know? And he's like, I don't hear it. And I'm like, you can't hear that? And so I got my parents, you know, and I'm like, they're like, what's going on? And I'm like, there's people talking. I just hear people constantly talking and having a party. And of course, you know, my mom and dad were kind of closed-minded about the afterlife and, you know, use that word that I really don't. It's not that I don't like it, but it was my imagination. I was dreaming. And I knew that never settled with me because I knew this was real. I knew this was, I was hearing this. I wasn't imagining this. So kind of dismissed that. And then about, well, it was probably 7 or 8. I remember watching a TV show about President Lincoln on the TV. And it was one of the shows that was on a Saturday. And they were talking about how Lincoln was, you know, people, there's been instances of after Lincoln's assassination, his presence makes himself known at the Lincoln bedroom in the White House. He was very much like there's talk about he was in the spiritualist realm. You know, he used to have a spiritualist medium come to the White House. His wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, was a spiritualist and got into spiritualism after their son passed, to keep in contact and as a way of grieving. So he was very much around the spiritualist world. Well, as we were talking about Lincoln, it kind of piqued my interest because I've always had this affinity and love for Lincoln and never knew why. But what was weird is when I was watching this show, I knew what was going to happen next and where the story was going and the story of Lincoln's life. And I'd never really studied Lincoln. I mean, I was like 8 years old at the time. And so, especially when it came time to talk about the Civil War, I knew stuff about the Civil War. And I was like, it was very familiar to me at the time, but I didn't know why. So, and over the years, I've done at least 2 past life readings. I've had other mediums tell me that I have this affinity with Lincoln, which kind of confirmed what I already knew. But I've had 2 different mediums tell me that I was Tad Lincoln in a past life. So sometimes I call President Lincoln my dad or Father Lincoln. At age 10, when my grandmother passed unexpectedly, I was really close to my grandmother, as most 10-year-olds are, and really couldn't comprehend the idea of death because it was so foreign to me. This is the first time I ever lost a loved one. And so I just couldn't accept the fact that when we die, that's it. There's got to be something more. It just didn't answer a lot of the questions. And so some months after, I remember sitting there, and I grew up on Cranbrook campus, and it's like 350 acres of fields and woods. And I remember sitting at this one field, and it's the athletic field, and there was this fog rolling in. And I remember seeing like the fog kind of parting. And when it parted, I felt like the spirit came forward. I was like, whoa, what is this? It was kind of eerie because you're not used to dealing with it. And the first time you have spirit interaction, you're like, okay, I'm kind of intrigued, but I'm kind of freaked out at the same time. But I'm like, you know what, just work with it because it feels familiar. So I worked with it. It turns out it was a spirit of my grandmother. I didn't see her, but I felt her presence. I felt that, like a loved one's energy, if you will. And what I heard at the time, which also kind of freaked me out, was I heard her voice clear as day say, you have the gift and it's time to develop and use it. Like, okay, what gift is this? And she kind of faded back and I never really got that answer. So I was kind of like, what gift? Well, years later, as I was talking to some of my aunts and uncles, and my grandparents on my dad's side were devout Catholics, really into the Catholic Church. And my aunts and uncles are all really into the metaphysical world. And I was talking to my aunts and uncles at a family reunion, and they're like, oh yeah. And it made complete sense because one of the things I found out at this reunion was my grandmother and grandfather were avid readers of Edward Casey. And I've always felt like my gift came down through my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandpa Norton's mother. And so I didn't realize what the gift was until I actually read a book on Hans Holzer. Hans Holzer, for those that don't know, was the first true ghost hunter. And he wrote a book of all his accounts. It's over 150 accounts of over his years. And what he used to do was he would go to these haunted sites like Hampton Court. He'd go to like places around the US and work with individuals that had weird activity happen in their houses. And he documented all the cases. The way he documented it was twofold. He wrote meticulous notes. He recorded every session on what they were experiencing. And 3, he worked with a medium to pull out the history. And when I read this book, because it was the ghost and it was, what I was into at the time and learning about the spirit world. And when he used to work with and I can't remember her last name, but I remember her first name, Sybil. And the way she worked was like, oh, I know what the gift is now. I have mediumship abilities. And so I started working with it at that time. And then I recalled the story about Lincoln, and like I said, I've had mediums over the years, so I decided that, this affinity with Lincoln, I would call him Lincoln to try and, work with him. And, developed a spiritual team then, even though I really didn't know what a spiritual team was. So over the years, I've had numerous encounters with spirits. And like I said, that's why I found spiritualism to be my home. And, it's been a lifelong passion and learning experience. One of the ways that I really got into and I didn't know what it was at the point, but I was just kind of developing it on my own, because I knew what I had, how to work with it, what not to do, what to do. And so one of the things that I would help, and this is one of the things that we can do as spiritualists, is I became part of a paranormal team, or ghost hunters. And we go to different, at the time we were one of the few groups in Michigan. When we started over 25 years ago, there was probably only 6 or 8 groups in the Metro Detroit area. Now there's probably like thousands of groups. So I would work with the paranormal group. Not only was I a paranormal investigator because I found it intriguing, but I really wasn't afraid of the spirit world, because that's the number one question you get at the time. Like, when you're a paranormal investigator, like, aren't you afraid? And it's kind of like when you talk to an exterminator, like, aren't you afraid of that bee's nest you're messing with? Aren't you afraid of getting sprayed by that skunk you're messing with? People that are experts in their field have that comfort level of, they know what to expect, what not to expect. And that's part of puts the fear aside, if you will. Now, saying, there are times where you get uncomfortable, but so I've worked with, paranormal groups, investigating homes, working with the spirits to try and figure out why spirits may have remained in the house, or is it a loved one, and what message they're trying to get across. And it's really satisfying, and it's kind of a confidence thing, because when you first get into mediumship, your first thing is like, oh, am I telling the right story, or, am I going down the right path or not? And you got to put that aside, because once you get that confidence and you earn that trust in yourself, you can do the most amazing things and experience the most amazing opportunities. But, when you get that confirmation from a family member or somebody you just met in an investigation, and they're like, oh, well, that makes sense. This is my grandmother trying to get through. And, I recognize the signs now. You get that comfort level of the person you're working with at the home, but it also gives them an understanding of what is in their house, so it kind of eases that little uncertainty, and working with them in terms of the spiritual world. One of the things that I also developed is, in doing this, I learned how to trance. And trance came very easy to me. It actually came in an investigation where I felt the spirit come in, and I was like, do I work with it? Do I not work with it? Because I don't want to pull in, so I always do a prayer of protection, and it only allow the white light in and keep the dark out. I also use a safety who can watch out for me. So over the years, I've worked with the paranormal teams. We always had one person that would watch for signs or signals that I was under undue stress, or going too far, or pulling in something that shouldn't be there, and lurking, out for me. Because when I go into trance, I'm either semi-trance, which is like I'm in control, but I still have that ability to pull back, or full trance where I'm not in control. I'm not there. I completely step out and allow the spirit to come up through. So that's important when you do trance. And, I tell everybody who's interested in trance, and trance is not something everybody can do. And it's one of those things that it takes a special type of person, and you have to have that confidence in doing it, because it is exhausting at times. Some of the other cool things I've experienced is when, I don't remember what year it was, when I was putting these notes together, I kind of was trying to figure it out. I remember I came home from work and I was completely exhausted one day, and I laid down on the couch. And those naps where you just I call them power naps, where you just lay down on the couch, and the minute your head hits the pillow, you're gone. And I remember having laying down, hitting the pillow, and immediately having this floating sensation. I was like, okay, and then visualizing this whole scene play out in front of me and feeling like I was floating. And I looked back and I had like this umbilical cord, like an astronaut. And I was like, oh, what is this about? And then I don't know how long it went on for. It could have been 2-3 minutes. It could have been 20, 30 minutes. I don't know. But at some point I felt like I felt like something tugging on that cord. Like I had reached the end of the cord, and it was almost the sensation, and I laugh about it now because it was almost like, the your vacuum cleaner has where you pull on the cord and it retracts itself. That's kind of what I felt like. I had reached the end and it was hitting a red spot, and so it was going to retract automatically. And I remember feeling like really weird because I was being pulled back, and as I came back into my body before I woke up, I distinctly remember the sensation of feeling like my body was being shoved into warm jello. And I realized at that time that that is my spirit or soul returning to the body, and I had astral traveled. To this day, I don't know how I did it or how I can do it again, because it was such a unique, kind of cool experience, but kind of weird at the same time. Because one of the things I've read is that when you return, like astronauts, when they go to space, they come back and they feel the sense of gravity and they feel like really heavy. That's kind of what I felt when I astral traveled. And so I'd love to be able to do it again because it was kind of cool. The other experience that I had was, and you'll hear this a lot, even people that don't know, I believe everybody has the gift of mediumship. It's to what extent. It's just working with it and learning how to tune into it and turn it off. And when my grandmother, my mom's mom, went in for surgery one time, I just had the most unsettling feeling. Turns out she basically died on the operating table and they revived her. But I remember I was traveling for work, and I remember waking up at like, I don't know, it was 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's considered like the witching hour. Between 2 and 5 is when spirits are most active, but that's kind of the folklore because spirits are always active. It's just more people recognize them between that time because that's the time we're sleeping and it's quiet at night. But I remember like rolling over in the hotel room bed and feeling my grandmother's presence standing there. And she goes, don't worry, I'm fine. And I knew she was already passed. And so when I got up the next morning, my mom called and said she had passed overnight. And I said, I know that, because she had come to me. So these are just kind of a few of the cool examples I've had. I've been in seances also where I've seen spirit lights and been touched and heard the trumpets moving around. And, we did a seance where we had 7 trumpets, and it sounded like they were all coming together, clashing together and banging on each other when they first, and it was like, normally when you're in seance, it starts out really quiet and kind of builds. This was like somebody flipped a light switch and it was all chaos, like right off the get-go, and it was the coolest thing. It was like that roller coaster, it wasn't like the old roller coasters where you go up the big hill and you go down and you're in for a ride. This was like the Top Fuel dragster at Cedar Point, where it just shoots you right off the get-go at 120 miles an hour. That's how this seance was. And some of the stuff, we used to have a sacred circle here, and some of the stuff we heard was really cool. So in closing, I want to, pass along some lessons. Like I said, everybody has the gift of mediumship. And the hardest thing for me was, and I get asked this when I teach the mediumship class, how do you, when you're a medium, one of the things as a child that I had experienced throughout the years was I found that I couldn't control it. I couldn't, not control it, but I couldn't shut it off. So the way I would shut it off, or just not shut it off, is I would just kind of envision a radio, like turning the radio down or clicking it off. Like, if you have, I don't know, my dad always listened to AM radio in the baseball game, and if you just were tired of the baseball game, you could just go shut the radio off and it was done. Same thing with mediumship. Just envision going to a meditation, envision a radio, either turning it down or just shutting it off. It doesn't mean you're losing a gift. You're just turning it off. The other thing you can do is ask spirit to step back. You know, if spirit comes in too close, too quick, just ask them to step back. You know, your energies aren't aligning. You know, you get that uncomfortableness because your vibrations aren't aligning, if you will. The other thing that I ask is if you have any children, grandchildren, friends that, you know, are getting into mediumship, don't ever tell them it's their imagination. And I say that from experience because literally when I heard that imagination, I just played it off as my imagination, and it took me years and so much work to be able to reopen that door. Because once you close, I mean, kids, when they're young, have the ability to see. It's through learning and us telling us, you know, it's their imagination, and closing that down, that they shut that door. And it's very difficult to get it open once you do. Or been told it's your imagination. And the last thing that I'd pass along is I've been told time and time again from my spirit team, don't ever use your gift for personal gain, because they will take it away. It is a gift, and they can shut it down relatively quickly. You know, you hear about, I had I wouldn't say a friend, it was more of an acquaintance, and she was really good as a medium. And she started getting into the, you know, doing shows and talks and store, and then she started pushing herself to get really big, and it turned into, she was a great medium to ego, and then everything fell apart. The store burned down. She lost everything in the store. She ended up with medical issues. She ended up with, you know, a divorce. And I'm not saying that's all related to that ego, but it just, you know, having that storefront and working the storefront, you know, I've always felt like they kind of, for lack of a better term, put her in her place, kind of, because like I said, it is a gift and it's used responsibly. Use it for the greater good, not for personal gain. So that's my story. And I thank you for allowing me to share it today. I hope you learned something about spiritualism and how we can use it in my story, because I've had some cool experiences over the years. So thank you.